Dzień dobry Państwu.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. The atmosphere became very serious. So it's the 12th Congress of Banking. Risk few epochs we've gone through during those 12 years. Maybe we should speak less about risk. Because, of course, you've been doing quite well in the sector. The economy is doing great. The banking tax is there. The Swiss franc issue. So it's not that serious. But, of course, there are things that we don't know. But there are also things that we don't know about them. That is why it is worthwhile to speak about the risk. My name is Robert Stanislavich, and I'll try to help you go through this Congress, to guide you through this Congress. And I would now like to ask Mariusz Cholewa, the president of the board of the BIK, the Credit Information Bureau, to open officially this meeting. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 12th Banking Risk Congress. This Congress is unique because it's been 20 years since BIK was created, and we'll celebrate this event today. I would like to give a special welcome to our special guests, including Ms. Katarzyna Zajdel-Kurowska, member of the board of National Bank of Poland. Welcome. Mr. Zdzisław Sokal, the president of the board of the Banking Guarantee Fund, Mr. Marcin Pachucki, deputy chairman of the Financial Supervision Board, Mr. Krzysztof Pietraszkiewicz, the president of Polish Banking Association, Ms. Żabulka, the president of the Association of Cooperative Bank, Mr. Van Tienens, the partner with whom we work together on anti-fraud and cyber threats, Mr. Adam Grabarczyk from Development Bank of Singapore. Adam, are you here? Well, I'm sure he'll be here in a moment, so welcome him again. Today is a special day because the Banking Information Office is celebrating its 20th anniversary, about its history, about how it worked for the last 20 years, about how it happened. Then banks call it the mine of information, the foundation of the modern system and the economic development engine. You will hear about that all during the evening gala, to which I'd like to invite you. But before that, we'll talk about the future, about the bank which is using latest technologies, which is using artificial intelligence, big data in its business, about the bank which is using which can provide good loans to businesses and do business, and ultimately a bank that can protect itself against cyber threats. Last year, during the opening of the Congress, I told you about interbanking platform. We've implemented it last year, and I would like to tell you with great pleasure that the platform is working. The first participants have started to use this system, and the interest is so great that more and more institutions are queuing to get connected to this information, and I'm really, really happy about it. It's a great news. To this tool, we'll add solutions that will help banks to protect against cyber threats. I hope that next year I will be able to tell you about a cyber fraud detection tool. Now, Churchill used to say that the speech should be exhaustive, should exhaust the subject rather than the audience. So I will end on this note, and I will give the floor to our host. Well, of course, we'll keep talking about risk, and we'll talk about challenges. So, kind of challenges can we have in such wonderful time when the economy is developing by 4.7% in the last quarter. So, let us have Ms. Katarzyna Zajdel-Kurowska, member of the board of the National Bank of Poland, talk to us about those challenges. I don't have this cool microphone, so I will use this dice. President, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the National Bank of Poland, I would like to thank you very much for inviting us to participate in the 12th Banking Risk Congress. I'm really pleased to participate in this anniversary edition of the Congress. I don't think that we don't need to convince anybody how big is important for the Polish economy. BIG that celebrates its 20th anniversary. This institution is important not only for the banking and financial sector. Thanks to its mission, implementing its mission, the BIG builds trust in the banking system and increases awareness of the consumers. This 12th Congress is important part of BIG's activity, and it's renowned among persons who are dealing with banking risk, and it's an important forum for exchanging views. This year we celebrate one more anniversary, and that I would like to mention in my speech today. Unfortunately, it's not such a great anniversary. It's been 10 years since the onset of the financial crisis that was a result of too loose regulation of the banking sector. Based on this experience, I would like to focus in my speech on three areas that are precondition the functioning of the Polish financial system, in particular the banking sector. First, concerns the macroeconomic and financial environment of Poland and connected risks for the second area will concern financial regulation and implementation of those regulation consequences for the banking sector. And the third area, which is the main theme of today's Congress, is about modern technologies which are so important for the current banking sector. So let me start with the big picture. That is macroeconomic challenges and macroeconomic environment for the banking sector. The basic risk generator external to Poland is the important change in the risk premium that could I don't need to convince anybody that the pricing on the international market reached its peak. There's an overheat in the capital market, and which can give rise to important risks once the risk materializes and those speculation bubbles burst. The premium and the inflation premium are on a historical level. This contributes to economic development thanks to influx of cheap financing for the economy, but it also contributes to increasing the debt in the private and public sector, and also increases vulnerability to increase of interest rates. More and more investors are get engaged in strategies which assume low volatility. Central banks assume that they will be very cautious about normalizing monetary policies, but it won't be harmonized in the sense that banks will normalize at a different time, and that the pace of normalization can be different than expected by analysts and market participants. Polish financial system is to a limited degree vulnerable to the risk because it has very strong economic foundations. The data that we received yesterday proved that the economy is developing at a very high rate, 4.7%, and there is a chance that we will achieve more than 4.5% increase this year. The inflation is still below the target, even though the butter prices are increasing the inflation rate. We have a sustainable payment balance. Yeah, I can see everybody sees the increase in butter prices, and of course the budgetary deficit is below the target. So in this situation, one could say, in this strongly balanced economy, the external risk is limited. However, we could say that there are limits on that, because 10 years ago I can remember a situation when Polish economy was also developing very strongly. Inflation was low, the deficit was balanced, and we had very low deficits, and it seemed that it will be a strong counterweight to the external wave that hit us as a result of financial crisis. Of course, Poland avoided the strong consequences of the crisis thanks to stable, balanced and very conservative banking sector. So we could say that we avoided recession thanks to a stable financial sector, among other factors. But we must not forget that the risk is still very high. The second important challenge, especially in the Eurozone, is low profitability of the banking sector and threats resulting from irregular credit. Low profitability is a risk, is the result of various factors. There's a pressure on margin. The banking sector in the Eurozone is overgrown. It's not efficient cost-wise, and its sources of income are not diversified. The irregular credit contributes to the problems in the banking sector. Unfortunately, in the past, there were too low reserves for irregular credits, which now is a problem for the sector. This phenomenon is limited in spite of very cheap money provided by the European Central Bank. This limits the credit activity of the banks, and it limits the economic development. It is also a factor that causes the European Central Bank to purchase assets and to maintain negative interest rates. In Poland, we can see positive trends in the credit portfolio. Even though there is no systemic risk, the mortgage loans, especially in Swiss francs, is very important. The banks should voluntarily restructure housing credits in foreign currencies. In accordance with recommendations that will ensure most efficient use of assets with the smallest risk for financial stability. Reduction of this portfolio will reduce client exposure to changing foreign exchange. And now let me move on to the second area that I would like to discuss for a moment. However, I wouldn't like to take up too much of other speakers' time. I would like to talk about regulatory challenges for banks, and I will focus on those that will be most important for banks next year, namely the new MSSS 9 that will require new reserves for expected loan or credit losses. It's a very important change that requires a lot of work on the part of banks. Also, when the standard enters into force, and the banks will have to recognize the increased allocations. Also, the Basel Committee and the European Commission are working on the changes. However, even though the proposed changes will seem not to have important impact on the situation of banks in Poland, operational risk, the consumer risk, they will increase the capital needs in the future. With the introduction of financial buffers, that is the buffer security and systemic risk buffer, this will require banks to maintain higher capital requirements. Another challenge for the banks is the introduction of the MREL requirement, but I will not discuss it because my colleague has a presentation for it, so I will not discuss that in my speech. Those requirements contribute or will contribute to increasing the resilience of the banking system, and as a central bank we have a very positive opinion about it. But we realize that in short term they may constitute a challenge, especially in the context of decreasing profitability and other challenges for the sector. We take it into the account when we assess the stability of the system, and this is the basis for our recommendations. Let me move on to the last area, namely new technologies. More and more challenges for single banks, but also for the entire sector, as well as other institutions, is linked with technological progress. Let me refer to only two issues, fintech and cyber risk. Fintech development creates possibilities for clients and service providers, but it can also challenge traditional financial institutions and regulators because of problems with stability. This area requires a lot of intellectual investments. Recently, the International Monetary Fund published a report, interesting report on that. It says that as a result of financial revolution, the financial system will change. We just don't know if it's going to be an evolution or a revolution, because the borders between services, institutions disappear. The barriers, introduction barriers to the market are changing, but the trust remains important, very important in the system. Regulators should weigh the effectiveness and stability. We should make sure that we will not create a less stable system, but at the same time we must not limit innovation in economy. This will require supervision of certain types of services rather than institutions, as this is the case now. Central banks already now consider advantages and disadvantages of access to of different providers to providing services. What is very negative both for banks and for financial security network is the cyber risk issue. Today's conference is devoted to this, among other things. This risk is usually analyzed for individual institutions, but we must not forget about its possible systemic consequences. There may be problems with risk for clients and them accessing the banking services. There can be also problems through the reputation channel. The example of first type of problems is central settlement platforms or banking institutions that offer advanced services like currency platforms. There might be problems for payment infrastructures like SWIFT system. The risk for operations of those institutions can reduce the capability to provide services, which would mean that the risk would materialize. Materialization of risk in a single institution may materialize the risk in the system. The threat to payments between banks resulting from lack of access to the transaction system by one institution can have negative impact on the other institutions. A lack of expected payment streams may cause the sales of assets, and in extreme cases also those with little liquidity. The assets pricing may go down and may cause negative spiral in the market. Materialization of the market can ultimately lead to problems with banks' capability to pay out their assets.
10 years ago, one of the biggest banks in the financial system collapsed. And what were the consequences for the general system in the world? Now, when we have advancement of digitization, and when we are really excited about this technology and this advancement, we forget about the fact that the risk for one institution may spread or may accumulate and cause larger risk for the whole financial sector, and so it may bring consequences which we tested 10 years ago. Minimizing this risk in the changing conditions of technology is a huge challenge. We, of course, have the guidelines for managing risk in IT technology, but we do not know how to tackle single and particular attacks. Still, effective addressing of this risk will need conceptual work on our part. To conclude, I would like to stress that the task of the central bank and the financial system is to stabilize the financial system, but without cooperation on the part of the market participants, our mission will fail. I think that the Congress is a good platform for exchanging opinions and views how these challenges may be tackled. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a fruitful debate. This was Ms. Katarzyna Zajdel, who is a member of the board of the Polish Bank Association. Of course, we assume that we have cycles in the system, and each good news brings us closer to the bad news, unfortunately. Ladies and gentlemen, now something that we are all afraid of, I think, because I'm going to talk about the MREL directive. Where should we find money for restructuring of banks which are in troubles? I think that it is already present in different markets, and it all starts with Basel VI and other directives and regulations. But actually, it is not easy. It is never easy. We have to do it. We have to face a more difficult situation. And now, Zdzisław Sokol, the president of the management board of the Banking Guarantee Fund, will talk about that, about MREL.
Jak tu się tym... Chyba powinienem w drugą stronę cofnąć jakoś. Okay. Panie prezesie, Szanowni Państwo, bardzo
Mr.
dziękuję za
President,
zaproszenie.
ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your
Duża
invitation.
przyjemność dla mnie,
It
że
is a
mogę
huge
dzisiaj
pleasure
być z
for me
Państwem,
that
ale
I
też
can talk to you
poczucie
today,
obowiązku
but it is also my
niesamowite
obligation,
wyzwanie, żeby
and it is a
w krótkim
challenge for
czasie
me
przekazać informacje
give you all the
w sposób bardzo
information
praktyczny.
in a short
Pamiętacie
time,
Państwo pewnie
information that is
powiedzenie
practical.
klasyka,
Probably you
piszę do
remember
siebie długi
this
list, bo nie mam czasu na krótki. Prawda? Spróbujemy
the
wyzwać,
saying of a
sprostać tym
classic.
wyzwaniom
I'm
w
writing a
20
short
minut.
list to
Proszę
a
Państwa,
short letter too because I don't have the time to write a long letter
Kongres,
to. Ladies and gentlemen, the Congress
patrząc na informacje, mamy dwie
big
liczby
is focused
na
on
slajdzie wcześniejszym,
two
który oglądaliśmy, a mianowicie
figures,
20 lat
that is 20
BIK-u
years
i
of
12
BIK and
lat
12
Kongresu.
years of the
Proszę
Congress.
Państwa, 20 lat to
Ladies
pełna
and
zdolność do
gentlemen,
czynności prawnych.
12
Gratuluję, panie
years
prezesie.
of full capability
12
to
lat
take legal
Kongresu,
acts
czyli
and
12
12 years
kongres,
of
to
Congress
ograniczona zdolność do
is
czynności prawnych.
limited,
13 rok za
limited
chwilę, w
capability
następnym roku pełna
to
zdolność do
take
przepraszam,
act
ograniczona
laws.
zdolność do czynności prawnych, ale BIK jest instytucją cały czas od pierwszego kongresu
But BIK
dojrzało.
is
Instytucją,
a
która
very
ma
mature
bardzo
institution
duży
and this
wpływ,
so
istotny wpływ
since the
na
beginning of the
stabilność
congresses,
finansową,
and it has huge
instytucji
impact on the
polskich.
stability of the
Gratuluję, panie
financial
prezesie.
system in
To
Poland
jest,
and the
instytucja,
financial stability of
która
Polish
ma naprawdę
institutions.
bardzo dobre,
Congratulations
państwo
to
doskonale
you,
wiecie,
Mr. President, because the
korzystamy z tych raportów,
institutions is great. Your
opieramy się
reports
w
are
decyzjach
fantastic.
swoich
We
bardzo często,
base our decisions on your reports.
wyznaczaniu mapy
Very
ryzyki,
often when we
etc.
are mapping
Szanowni
risks
państwo,
and so on.
Pani prezes
Ladies and gentlemen,
Katarzyna przedstawiła Państwu
Ms. Katarzyna
prezentację,
presented to you a
informowała o sytuacji, jaką mamy
presentation
na rynku.
and she
Trudno
talked
się
to
nie
you about
zgodzić
the
z
situation
tym,
in the
że,
market,
mamy
and I
sytuację
cannot
wzrostową
disagree
w
with
świecie,
you.
mamy sytuację
The
bardzo
fact
dobrą.
is that the situation in the world is good.
Pozytywny, w zasadzie w całym
Economic
świecie,
growth
poza
is positive in the
lekkimi
whole
problemami
world
w
besides
Afryce, trochę
small
ograniczony
problems
wzrost
in
w Rosji, ale
Africa
otoczenie gospodarcze
and in
Polski
Russia, but
bardzo
actually
dobre. I
the
również jak
economic
gdyby
situation of
sytuacja
Poland and
gospodarcza,
the Poland's surrounding is
GDP
very
w
good,
Polsce na
and the increase of
poziomie
GDP in
wysokim.
Poland is really
Ale
high.
musimy pamiętać, jak
But
jest
we must
dobrze,
remember
jak jest
that
wysoko,
when
to
the situation is good,
prawdopodobnie
when
kiedyś
there
przyjdzie
is growth,
moment, że
then
będzie
probably we
gorzej.
will
Mamy te
face
dwie takie
problems
litery
in
V.
the future.
Jeśli jesteśmy na dolnym poziomie, jest nisko,
We have a
no to
V
wszystko wskazuje na to,
letter,
że
and
jest
so
nisko,
when we are
ale w
low,
perspektywie
then
będzie
we know
wysoko.
that
Jak
we are
jest
low, but we
wysoko,
have a perspective
to
of
musimy być
growth.
gotowi, że
And when we are
może być tendencja
high
może się
in
odmienić.
this letter V,
Prawda?
then
To
we
jest
know
ta
that we can
gra
go
decyzyjna,
down
gdzie Po
sometime.
prostu tak jak na giełdzie, kupować na spadkach,
It is like
sprzedawać
in the stock
na wzrostach.
market. We
Proszę
should
państwa,
buy when
dlatego też,
stock market
absolutnie
is
zgadzam się z wszystkimi
decreasing
tezami, które
and
tutaj
sell
były
when it is
mówione
growing.
przez
So,
panią prezes.
ladies and
Zgadzam się
gentlemen,
również z tym,
I
że
agree with
w polskich
Ms.
warunkach
Katarzyna, and I
dzięki
also
właściwej
agree that
działaniom,
in Poland, thanks
instytucjom,
to the
instytucji
right actions
nadzorczych,
of the
dzięki
regulators
właściwym
and thanks to the
działaniom
right activities
Banku
of
Centralnego,
the central
który
bank,
ma unikalną,
which is
w tej chwili,
unique
tradycyjno-konserwatywne
and which
podejście do polityki
really is
monetarnej.
conservative with regard to the monetary policy, which is unique on the European scale. And thanks to the interest rates which can be used to regulate the market by decreasing them or increasing them, it gives us the feeling of security.
Wydaje się, że
It also seems that the fiscal policy,
charakter, że tak powiem, optymalnych działań
which
w
is
zakresie, mam nadzieję, że
based on
ta polityka
optimum
będzie
activities,
miała pozytywny
and I
wpływ
hope that
na
this policy
wzrost
will
gospodarczy,
have
ale również
positive
jak gdyby
impact on the
pozytywne działanie
economic
na
growth, but
przedsiębiorców.
also positive impact
Szanowni
on
państwo,
entrepreneurs.
MREL
Ladies
to
and
jest
gentlemen,
coś, co
MREL
zgodnie z tym, co pan
is something that's
powiedział, z
in line what
obligatoryjnym obowiązkiem
my
zaimplementowania
predecessor said.
dyrektywy BRR. Jak
Is
państwo zapewne
related
doskonale
to
wiecie,
the
Polska,
evaluation and opinion of
była
the
zobowiązana
regulation.
do zaimplementowania dwóch dyrektyw,
As you probably
dyrektywy
know,
DGS i
Poland
dyrektywy
was supposed
BRD.
to
Uczynione to zostało
approve of two
poprzez,
directives,
ustawę
and we did it
Bankowym Funduszu
based
Gwarancyjnym
on
w
the
2000
Banking Guarantee
uchwalono
Fund
w 2000
Act. It was
16
passed
roku,
in
9
2016 on the
i
9th of October,
operacyjne efekty tego
and the operational
wdrożenia
effects of this
odczuwaliśmy,
implementation were to
od
be felt
właśnie,
and seen and observed
9
starting from the 9th of October 2017,
tak to wynikało z ustawy.
because this is what the Act said.
Ta ustawa i
Ladies and
dyrektywa
gentlemen,
DGS
this
wdrożyła
Act implemented the solutions which resulted from the crisis experiences, especially those felt and observed in the whole world. The experience where the costs of restructuring of financial institutions were borne by taxpayers. And it all translated in the increase of the balance sum of the investment banks and of the budgets of the states. And it brought about the situation where we knew that we have to approach this situation differently. We should, the cost of mistakes in management, the taxpayers should be those who bear these costs. So one bank may collapse, and then the budgetary deficit and the activities in quantitative easing and in unstable monetary policy. This was all related to what Ms. Katarzyna said. We want to change this approach, and we will see which direction it takes. We know what the situation in Fed is. They changed their approach. They don't want to do this policy anymore, this quantitative policy. We can see what the activities of the central banks are. But what is important here is that we changed our approach to the cost related to restructuring. In line with the directive, the institution which is responsible for very difficult situations where we have to rescue the system is now an institution which is called the Resolution Institution. In Poland, it is the Banking Guarantee Fund, and I have the honor to be the president of this fund. Ladies and gentlemen, in line with the Act, the Banking Guarantee Fund implemented as the resolution organ the restructuring plans, and they comprise two plans. Group plans for the institutions which act internationally, and individual plans. Within the implementation of those plans, we had to also take activities regarding the indication of the moral directions. As the Banking Guarantee Fund, within 1 year since coming into force of the Act, already passed about 650 plans of forced restructuring and submitted the summaries of those plans to respective institutions, that is to commercial banks, to credit unions, to cooperatives, and to brokerage houses. This was a huge challenge, but the mission was completed and accomplished, and those plans include the assumptions of the Act. This element is not present in the plans which were drafted for the group institutions and international institutions. And now I would like to talk about MREL in more detail. I would like to talk about forced restructuring. I wouldn't like to talk about definition, but actually we already know that the definition of this forced restructuring is related with force. So the Bank Guarantee Fund is a resolution organ, as I said, and so we had this power to use our capability and competencies in this respect. When we've got an entity which is endangered with bankruptcy, we know what it means. When there are no prerequisites indicating that there are possible management activities which will delete the threat of the bankruptcy. And thirdly, the activities of the entity are necessary for the public interest. Well, the public interest is also defined in our Act, as well as it is also defined in the directive. The public interest is defined by 5 objectives. The objective of the forced restructuring is maintenance of financial stability and the protection of the confidence in the financial sector and securing the discipline in the market. Secondly, reducing the exposure of public funds or the probability of their exposure towards the financial sector of its in particular entities. And thirdly, it's very important, ensuring the continuation of the continuance of the critical functions of the institution. Fourthly, the security of the depositories and investors covered by the system. And ladies and gentlemen, if one of these points is fulfilled, then we've got public interest in question. Then we can use this instrument of forced restructuring. But I would like to stress it, that the basic instrument, the basic tool of resolution in forced restructuring is bankruptcy. Bankruptcy, according to the laws on bankruptcy, with all consequences related to it. But for the whole time in the resolution process, we have to draw our attention to the position of the creditors and the owners to bankruptcy. We have to compare the situation and to see what it looks like, whether the situation in resolution is not worse than in bankruptcy. So, ladies and gentlemen, those functions are, as you saw it, and they are included in the Act on the Banking Guarantee Fund and in the directive, as well as in other documents of European institutions. The main criteria for evaluation of the critical functions that are pursued by such entities are divided into two categories. The first category is the impact on the third parties, and the second category is replaceability. So, firstly, we take into account the nature and the reach of the activities. Secondly, we take into account the consumers, the clients of the entities, and the nature of the stakeholders on which the function impacts. Then the impact of the function on the market and public services. And now replaceability. It is very important. The legislator defines the replaceability very strictly. So the structure of the market of the function and availability of the suppliers of other functions. The capability of other suppliers to take over those functions and considering possible barriers of entering the market. Now the time which is needed to take over the functions by other entities, and the time needed to change the suppliers to a new supplier of this service. Now, during the work on the plans of forced restructuring, the main element, to put it simple, because we analyzed it very thoroughly, but I would like really to focus on two elements. First of all, we would like to go in the direction of the liquidation in the bankruptcy proceedings, which is the basic tool of resolution in the formula that was also used in the past, and now the bankruptcy court plays this role. And secondly, the forced restructuring. Forced restructuring, which is implemented through 3 or rather 4 tools. Now, taking over the enterprise, the bridge institution, and another instrument which is separate from the tools that were used during the credit crunch. So we had buyouts and we have buy-ins now. And the last thing, a complementary thing, is dividing
Przechodzimy do
assets.
wymogu, do MREL-a. Proszę
Now let's
Państwa,
move
w
to
planach
the MREL.
przymusowej restrukturyzacji,
Ladies and
które
gentlemen, in the
zostały
first restructuring plans which were
które
drafted
były konsultowane
and
z
which were
Komisją
consulted
Nadzoru
with the
Finansowego,
Polish Financial
które,
Supervision
były
Authority,
również
which
przekazane,
were
zostały
also
przekazane do
submitted
Narodowego Banku
to
Polskiego,
the
do
National Bank of
Ministerstwa
Poland, the
Finansów,
Ministry of
czyli tutaj mieliśmy ten
Finance.
element
So we
konsultowania
had this
tych
consulting
planów.
part, and we did it, we realized it.
Wyznaczone są dwa podstawowe elementy, takie kryteria. Po
And
pierwsze,
we
strategia
have two
resolution.
elements of it. First
Jaka
of all,
strategia?
the
Czy to jest
resolution
strategia
strategy.
upadłości, czy to jest
Is it the
strategia
strategy of
czy to jest
bankruptcy,
strategia,
of takeover,
buy-in, czy też
or
jest
buy-in?
możliwy bank pomostowy, o którym
Or
nie
maybe
mówiłem,
a
jako
bridge bank.
narzędzie też
We are
do
talking
użycia.
about bridge bank as about a tool which we can
Każdy
use
z Państwa,
too.
każdy bank, każda instytucja
So each and
otrzymała
every of
to
you,
streszczenie.
each bank, each institution
W tym
received
streszczeniu
this summary,
mamy informację,
and there is
każda
information
instytucja
there,
otrzymała,
and I would like to stress that
streszczenie, a
each
część z
institution got
Państwa,
summary, and
w
some
ramach
of you
struktur,
also within the
europejskich,
European structures
ma możliwość
will
otrzymania
receive
planu bezpośrednio,
plan
ponieważ plan
directly,
dla podmiotów transgranicznych,
because the plan
plany
for the
grupowe
international
przekazane zostały
entities
do
have
SRB,
been submitted to
Single Resolution Board, która jest organem
the institution
przymusowej
which is the
restrukturyzacji dla
first restructuring
banków
organ for
europejskich.
European banks.
I w ramach jak gdyby tego streszczenia wracając,
Within this summary, now going back
poza
to the
jak gdyby
summary,
strategią
beside the
resolution,
strategy
czyli
for
określenie,
resolution,
w którym kierunku w
that is
sytuacji
defining the
negatywnych
direction
zdarzeń organ resolution
of
pójdzie,
action in
jest
case of
informacja o
emergency, of
wielkości
difficult
MREL-a. Co to
situation.
jest MREL?
There
Państwo
is
widzicie,
an indication of
wzór
MREL.
niestety nie da rady
What
tutaj
is
bez
MREL?
pokazania tego wzoru.
Well, again,
Będę
I
używał,
cannot define it without
streszczeń i
using this
skrótów
formula.
pewnych. MREL, czyli minimalny
I
poziom
will use
funduszy
some
własnych i
abbreviations. So,
zobowiązań
MREL
podlegających umorzeniu
considers
lub konwersji.
minimum requirement for own funds
Równanie
and eligible
matematyczne to
liabilities.
jest w liczniku mamy fundusze
And
własne plus
above we
zobowiązania
have own
kwalifikowane.
funds plus
W mianowniku
qualified
fundusze własne plus
liabilities.
zobowiązania ogółem.
And
Można powiedzieć generalnie w przybliżeniu to jest suma
then
bilansowa na dzień dzisiejszy.
on the bottom
Proszę
line
Państwa,
we
to
have
jest,
own funds plus
definicja czy wzór,
liabilities in
który
total.
jest na dzień dzisiejszy
So, ladies and
obowiązkowy,
gentlemen,
natomiast
this is
będą
formula that is
zmiany
binding as of today, but we will
definicji MREL-a.
change
One
the
wynikają ze
definition.
zmian
We will
unijnych.
observe the change of the
Natomiast
definition.
to,
It
co jest
results from the
istotne,
changes
to,
made in the European
w
Union.
mianowniku
But
mamy
what is
właśnie
important here
te
is
fundusze
that in
własne
the
i
denominator we
zobowiązania
have own
kwalifikowane,
funds
które będę
plus
pokazywał, za chwilę będę definiował, gdzie one są. I chcę
qualified
wyraźnie powiedzieć to, co
liabilities.
w polskim sektorze
And I
bankowym
would like to say what is important in the
duży udział
Polish
właśnie
banking sector
funduszy
is
własnych i
huge share
relatywnie
of
niski
own
udział zobowiązań kwalifikowanych.
funds and low share of qualified
Jeśli chodzi o
liabilities.
ten MREL, to
When
on
it
składa
comes
się
to
jak gdyby z
MREL,
dwóch takich podstawowych
then
elementów.
it
Pierwsze to
is
jest
composed
kwota na
on two
pokrycie
basic
strat
elements. The
sytuacji,
first one is the sum for
problemów banku i drugi
covering
element,
losses,
bardzo istotny,
and the second element,
do
which is very
dokapitalizowania,
important,
czyli
the
pokrywamy
sum
stratę
for
i dajemy możliwości,
supplementing capital.
dajemy takie
So
fundusze,
we
takie
cover
środki, które
losses and we
pozwalają
give
na
the
to,
funds
żeby
which
bank
allow
w
the bank
przyszłości mógł
in the
realizować swoje
future
funkcje. Mamy jeszcze
to
dodatkowe
fulfill its functions.
uwarunkowania, które
And
pominiemy.
we have also
Proszę Państwa, mówiąc o
additional
MREL-u, nie
conditions.
możemy odnieść się do TILAC-a. W Europie mamy MREL-a.
In Europe, we have MREL. In the US, there is TILAC. So of course we need to take that into account. TILAC is mostly for major, for big companies. MREL, on the other hand, concerns everybody in Europe. So all institutions were required to determine MREL. Capital buffers in TILAC are off. In MREL, they are on.
Wymogi buforowe są włączone. Proszę Państwa, bardzo istotna różnica jest taka,
A very important difference is that Americans have different approach to eligible liabilities.
Zgodnie z TILAC-em,
According to TILAC,
jest 33%
there is an obligation of 33% of eligible liabilities,
pytanie, pewne wyzwanie,
which is a certain challenge for Europe, whether it should follow the same path or no. Some work has started on it. Maybe we will have obligatory MREL at 33% of eligible liabilities.
Proszę Państwa, może tak, spróbujemy popatrzeć sobie na tego MREL-a jeszcze.
Let us try to have a look at the MREL again, the scheme maybe. Now we can see the current shape of MREL with two colors. There's green color and the yellow color. Green is the loss absorption amount, and this, in yellow we've got recapitalization amount. In the first scheme we can see that there is Pillar 1, Pillar 2. Pillar 2 is add-on, additional requirements, and this common buffer, which is at the level of 1.25 today. So that's part 1. Part 2, that is the yellow for recapitalization, it's Pillar 1, Pillar 2 plus buffers. So that's the situation today. As regards the future, this will change. We don't know how. The work is going on at the European Commission, and we'll have loss absorption amounts. There will be Pillar 1, Pillar 2 counted twice. There will be a shared capital buffer, and there will be capital guidance, that is a recommendation provided to regarding for resolutional bodies. It's all under discussion now. We don't know when it will be completed. The requirements for shaping MREL in the future will be slightly different. As regards own funds, we don't need to discuss that, but there is a question about the place of eligible liabilities. This is item 3 under Article 440 of the bankruptcy law, but there will be a special category created for qualified liabilities. Will be between positions 5 and 6. The French, for example, support this idea a lot. As regards the approach to MREL, Polish law requires MREL to be determined this year, and we took the decision that to determine MREL, and looking at the situation in the world, at the first iteration of MREL determination in the group plans, MREL was not done. Also, they haven't determined plans for restructuring. We've done it. There are other countries that determined MRELs. That's the UK. We are talking about Denmark and Sweden. The approach is very similar to Poland, the one in Poland, which I'm going to discuss in a moment. What parameters, what criteria should be considered for MREL? First is long transitional period. That's 5 years until the 1st of January 2023. We also assume the rational activity, so the fund does not determine the path, the access path. This is up to the decision for the operator. So there's a discussion to which degree the eligible liabilities, the qualified liabilities, should be determined. We don't take the TLAC approach. Maybe in the following periods we'll have to come back to that. So there is a requirement to verify the forced restructuring plans. So every year you will be receiving information about this, an update on this. When calibrating MREL, we took the approach to three basic approaches. Number one, the size of MREL in a bankruptcy situation, MREL size during takeover and buy-in. During buy-in, MREL should be enough to cover losses, and should also ensure rebuilding market reliability. MREL amount when using the takeover should ensure covering losses for restructuring, and there should be an internal source of covering costs that results from takeover of property rights. And in case of bankruptcy, there should be no justification for additional burdens on the operator. So MREL should be at the level of the supervising, according with the decision of the supervising authorities. So here we have the specific formulas. We don't have time to discuss it. This information is available at the BFG website. You are kindly welcome to have a look at it. So what are the recommendations from you, banks, regarding the structure of MREL? Firstly, we recommend that you build the qualified liabilities. So good quality funds in a bank are good for security of the bank, but for the resolution authority, if they are too big, they are not comfortable. Because if the capital is eaten up, there is no eligible liabilities. We must have some capacity to use qualified liabilities. Instruments which are shared should be dedicated to professional operators, and here we agree. We are in line with the recommendation of the Financial Supervision Commission, which says that the value of instruments should not be less than 400,000 zlotys. Here we recommend a value of over 100,000 euros. Let me move on to conclusions. I'm running out of time. 20 minutes passed very quickly. So just a few words of summary. We've gone through enforced restructuring plans. We've had discussion with the community. We've had meetings with commercial banks and cooperative banks, SKOK banks. And of course, this is the first iteration this year. We are now in a new iteration, and we are asking banks to cooperate. We will invite you to cooperate, to share knowledge that you have, and we want to share our knowledge, and we want to get some knowledge from you, because those tools will be effective if we are well prepared. Of course, there's lots of problems regarding interpretation of regulations, which are now obligatory for you. We are collaborating with the Polish Banks Association, and thank you, President, for this collaboration. Some of the information has been forwarded to you. We are working on the rest of information. We are not less advanced than the rest of Europe regarding forced restructuring plans, but only in practice will we see how it works. So that is why we need to keep talking, we need to keep discussing, and we need to keep in touch. The important question is how to locate, how to place MREL In the future, it should be at the level of 30%. So in order to be able to convert MREL into shares, so the question is where we should place it. Is our internal Polish market, does it have enough capacity to fit it in? If it will be placed on a foreign market, what kind of impact will it have on the position of Poland, especially the international investment position? And the MPI is at 62.5%, as far as I remember, and the optimum level is not more than 35. So the question is how to get there. How to should we do it at the beginning of the period, or should we distribute it proportionally? Those banks, those institutions which are at the worst situation, they should use the priority before market is saturated with these securities. So there's lots of challenges. What's very important in the context of resolution is collaboration with financial security networks. We have a very lively discussion with the central banks regarding the possibility to use refinancing loans, supporting in the process of buy-in. We draw attention to many formal and legal problems. We are also having a very close discussion with the Financial Supervision Commission in the context of recovery period. What's very important is early intervention. Unless there is good supervision, unless there is unless this period works well, the whole process won't work. So what's very important is cooperation. We want to cooperate with you on ongoing basis. We will keep inviting you, we will keep informing you about our approach. Within forced restructuring plans, the resolution authority may decide that the plan is not feasible and may, under the current law, may require a bank to remove those negative activities. So the non-feasibility of the plan should be, or the feasibility of the plan should be demonstrated by the bank, then it's analyzed by resolution authority, consulted with the Financial Supervision Commission, and then the resolution authority either agrees with the plan or may enforce further work on the plan. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for the dialogue so far. Yesterday we've met with one bank, so we keep meeting banks. Ahead of us, we have challenges regarding cooperative banks. 550 banks plans were created. The resolution authority prepares such plans for all banks. It also determines MRELs for all banks. For some banks, MRELs are obvious. So the question is, what practices should we apply in the future? So to finish, and commenting on what Ms. Kurowska said, she talked about stable situation. Indeed, the capitalization level of Polish banks is good. The Polish banks are liquid. In a low interest rate situation, it seems that situation is good. So this all provides a foundation for the development of the banking sector and to contribute to the economic growth in Poland. But please treat the resolution authority, which is BGK, as an army, which should be used in an extreme situation. If we use forced restructuring, we will use this tool. We are having exercise about it, but as President Koenig said at one of the congresses, she said that a good resolution procedure is one which will never be used. So I wish you and myself that we never do resolution procedure or forced restructuring. Sorry for making too long. Yes, of course, we are hoping that the army will stay in the barracks. Of course, your institution had a lot of work recently. Now we will move on to issues which you will face very soon in 2018, namely the Payment Directive, MiFID II, and your favorite authority, the Financial Supervision Authority, represented by Mr. Marcin Pachucki, Deputy Chair of this authority. Welcome. Hello everyone, I'm extremely pleased to have an opportunity to meet with you today, especially that we are meeting in such a numerous group. Thank you, President, for the invitation. Our main theme of this Congress is managing bank in the future. And of course, we've heard, and the near future is what I would like to talk to you about today. I would like to comment on Regulations 2.0, regulations which will change the landscape of banking services, not only in Poland but also in the European Union. I would like to talk about MiFID regulation, MiFID II regulation, and PSD2 directive. Both regulations enter into force within the next 2 months, namely in January next year. Let me start my speech with the MiFID II directive. The revision of the directive is a part of a reform in the EU directed towards establishing a solid, more transparent, more responsible financial system, contributing to the societies and economies of member states. The regime of MiFID is a huge regulatory challenge. You should mention that, well, the numbers speak for themselves. MiFID I is a directive, implementing a directive and implementing regulation. We are looking at the entry into force of nearly 50 legal acts regarding MiFID. So we will be talking about MiFID II, MiFIR regulation, and 45 implementing pieces of law. And that's not all, because of course this picture will be supplemented by guidelines and Q&As which will be issued by various authorities. So the huge challenge in regulatory terms, but also in terms of effective application of the law, to make sure that the spirit of the directive, the objective of the revision be achieved, and the objective is that is to improve the protection of customers.
We can see this trend in the regulation of the European Union, not only in MiFID, but also you probably see new regulations.
które się pojawiają,
New
które są
regulations
publikowane,
which are passed, which
rzeczywiście
are
bardzo
published,
mocny nacisk kładą na
they are really focused on
klienta.
the protection of the
Chciałbym w
consumer
kontekście
and of
z
the
tej
customer.
perspektywy, ale także
And I would
z
like to
perspektywy
take
państwa
this perspective, but I would
obowiązków
also
sektora
like to take into account
bankowego,
the perspective of the
odnieść się do
banking
tych nowych
sector
rozwiązań,
while talking about the
które MiFID
new
przewiduje.
solutions that
Przede
MiFID
wszystkim,
takes into account.
no właśnie uwzględniając te nowe rozwiązania.
So, firstly,
jednym z tych pierwszych
looking at the
rozwiązań,
new
które
solutions,
przychodzi mi na myśl,
one
to
of the new
rozdzielenie
solutions is
doradztwa
the division
inwestycyjnego
of investment
niezależnego
advisory,
od doradztwa zależnego.
the independent
Doradztwo
advisory
zależne,
and the
doradztwo
dependent
inwestycyjne o charakterze
advisory.
zależnym będzie
So
polegało
the
na,
dependent
czy będzie
advisory
obejmowało
regarding
produkty
investments
i
will take
finansowe,
into account
instrumenty
the
finansowe
financial
emitowane,
instruments which are
wystawiane przez
issued
bank lub podmioty,
by the bank
blisko powiązane
or
z bankiem, w
related
przeciwieństwie oczywiście do
entities.
niezależnego, gdzie tym dostawcą tych
And the
instrumentów będzie
independent
podmiot
advisory
trzeci.
will
Warto
include
w tym
a third party
kontekście
as
wspomnieć,
the
że
issuer.
klient banku, klient
I
instytucji
would also
finansowej
like
już na etapie
to say
podpisywania
that
umowy
the customer of the
będzie
bank
wiedział, czy
will
bank
know
będzie,
at the moment of
rekomendował,
signing an
proponował,
agreement
oferował
whether
właśnie
the
produkty
bank
własne,
will
czy
suggest
będzie
its
działał
own
w
products
trybie
or
doradztwa
whether it
niezależnego,
will use
co oczywiście
independent advisory.
nakłada dodatkowe
Then,
obowiązki
of course, there are additional obligations.
analizowania
For example, the
szerokiej gamy
obligation of
produktów,
analyzing a
instrumentów
wide
finansowych w
range
taki
of
sposób,
products and financial
na końcu
instruments
tego
so that
procesu
at the end of this
rzeczywiście klient
process, the
utrzymywał,
customer
możliwość
receives
zainwestowania w
the
instrument
possibility
finansowy,
to
który
invest
rzeczywiście dla
in the
niego
financial
adekwatny,
instrument that is the
stosowny,
best for
odpowiada
himself
jego
or herself.
oczekiwaniom, wymaganiom. W kontekście doradztwa nie sposób nie wspomnieć także o oddzieleniu
In this context, we also should mention the separation of the payments for investment analysis and market analysis. We all know that at the moment these payments and these fees are covered and
od stycznia
by
najbliższego roku
commissioning
klienci będą
mandates to third parties, and from the January on, the clients and the customers will have the information about the fees that are paid by the bank and investment companies. They will be obliged to indicate all those fees and to evaluate such products.
Kolejną nowością jest objęcie
Another novelty
reżimem MiFID-u
is that MiFID will also include and comprise structured
Tutaj w tym zakresie kierunkowo MiFID się oczywiście
deposits.
stosuje w zakresie wymogów
Of
organizacyjno-technicznych,
course,
w
regarding
zakresie
the
reguł
organizational
świadczenia
and technical
usług.
requirements
No i zmierza to do
within
tego, żeby
the
rzeczywiście
provision of
standard świadczenia
services,
usług
we
inwestycyjnych
have to check whether the
odnoszący się
standard
do
of the
instrumentów
services
finansowych, w
regarding
tym
the
do
financial
produktów
instruments, including the
strukturyzowanych,
structured
był taki
products,
sam, jak
was the
najwyższy.
same,
Oczywiście nie
as
sposób nie
high as
wspomnieć o
possible. Of
rozporządzeniu
course,
PRIIPs w
we
tym
must
zakresie,
also
więc
stress
będziecie Państwo
the
zobowiązani, ci z Państwa, którzy dystrybuują, którzy
regulation in this respect. So all of you who distribute structured
rozporządzenie PRIIPs, czyli rozporządzenie, w
structured
dokumentów
products,
zawierających
you should also include
kluczowe
PRIIPs
informacje dotyczące
regulation in this respect. It regards the
Bardzo
group
długa nazwa
investment.
rozporządzenia, ale
The
oczywiście
regulation
nie
has
można
a very long
zapominać, bo
name,
ono
but
także jest
we
istotne z
cannot
perspektywy
forget about
zwiększenia
it because it is also
transparentności,
important when it
zwiększenia
comes to
zaufania
transparency
klientów do państwa,
of your
ale tym
activities
samym również
and
do rynku
confidence of your
finansowego w ogóle,
customers to you, but
za
also the
szalenie,
confidence and
szalenie
trust to the whole financial
istotne.
and banking system, which is very
Kolejną
important.
nowością, kolejnym wymogiem,
Another novelty,
pewną nowością, może
and
nie
it is
przesadzajmy z tym
completely
określeniem, że jest to
new.
zupełnie
Well,
nowa regulacja.
let's not say that this regulation
Jest to obowiązek
is
zarządzania
completely new, but
produktowego,
there is
obowiązek
some novelty
opracowania,
in it.
wdrożenia
There
oraz
is the
stosowania przez
obligation
bank działający jako emitent lub
to
wystawca
the bank
instrumentów
which
finansowych
issues financial instruments,
rozwiązań w zakresie określania
and this bank
oraz
must
zatwierdzania
apply
specyfikacji
solutions
poszczególnych
regarding
instrumentów finansowych,
defining specification
oraz
of
także sposobu ich
particular
obejmowania.
financial
Oczywiście tutaj
instruments
cel znowuż
and
ten
the
główny
manner
przyświeca
of
taki,
taking
aby-
up and covering
aby
the
od momentu,
financial instruments.
projektowania
So that from the
produktów
moment of
inwestycyjnych
designing
do
the
momentu ich
investment products
sprzedaży,
until
dystrybucji,
their sale and
działać
distribution,
w jak najlepszym
the
pojętym
bank
interesie,
should
żeby
act
finalnie
in the
nie
best
dochodziło
interest
do
so
chociażby
that
mis-sellingu.
we
I
don't
te regulacje
have
będą także dotyczyć
mis-selling in
dystrybutorów,
place.
dystrybutorów
Another
instrumentów
thing
finansowych.
regards distributors of financial
Kolejnym
instruments.
rozwiązaniem, które
And
służy
further
tej
solution,
szczytnej
which
idei
serves
ochrony
this
inwestorów,
great idea of protecting investors,
są kwestie rozwiązania poświęcone
is the issue
zachętom.
of encouragement.
Podmioty, które świadczą dwa typy usług, mianowicie
entities which provide two types of services, that is advising.
Doradztwo niezależne
And
oraz
in this
usługi
respect, I would
zarządzania
like to
portfelem nie
talk
będą
about
mogły
independent
takich zachęt przyjmować. Natomiast podmioty,
advisory,
które świadczą usługi
but
inwestycyjne w pozostałym zakresie,
entities which provide
pozostałe usługi
other
inwestycyjne,
services, other
będą
investment
mogły przyjmować zachęty,
services
ale pod pewnymi
will
warunkami. Tym
be
kluczowym warunkiem
allowed
jest,
to
tym zasadniczym
receive
warunkiem,
encouragement,
zasadniczym
but
obostrzeniem
on the condition
jest konieczność,
that it is necessary.
Konieczność wydatkowania kosztów
It is necessary to spend the expenses of the encouragement to improve the customer service. Only then such encouragement will be allowed to be received. In this context, it is also worth mentioning the obligation which has been imposed in the planned bills
w kontekście
implementing
towarzystw funduszy
MiFID,
inwestycyjnych, a państwo jako sektor
considering
bankowy jesteście
also
przecież głównym dystrybutorem jednostek uczestnictwa.
investment funds,
Te będą
and
miały
you
obowiązek
participate in investment
weryfikowania,
funds
czy
as well.
koszty,
So
które ponoszą z tytułu
the investment funds
opłaty
will
stałej w związku
need
z
verify the
dystrybucją,
fixed fee
jednostek
regarding
uczestnictwa
the
przez właśnie dystrybutorów. Rzeczywiście idą
distribution
na poprawę
by the
jakości klienta,
distributors.
więc ta
It
zmiana
will
w
have to
mojej
be
ocenie
verified
jest
whether
kluczowa, zasadnicza,
these amounts
istotnie
are spent to
przemodulowuje
improve the customer
dotychczasowy obraz
service. And
funkcjonowania
this will hugely change the
funkcjonowania
functioning
podmiotów,
of the
relacji
entities in
TFI, funduszy
relation
inwestycyjne,
of
dystrybutora, więc przede
the
wszystkim, jak
fund,
praktyka
investment
pokazuje,
fund companies and the banks.
Kolejnym rozwiązaniem, które nie ukrywam także
Another solution,
pomoże
and
bardzo
I would
mocno
like
Komisji
to
Nadzoru
stress that it will help the Polish Financial Supervision Authority in verification whether MiFID is applied effectively by you, is the obligation to record telephone calls and telephone conversations with your customers. It will allow the Commission, the authority, but also yourselves to verify whether the MiFID regulations, which are very broad, are applied in practice.
Są zaimplementowane i stosowane. Kolejnym, tak powtarzam, kolejnym, ale rzeczywiście tych nowości jest
another
sporo.
novelty, I say another quite a lot of times, but there are really a lot of new things here,
tych rozwiązań.
and there are new solutions. So another new solution is product intervention. It is worth mentioning here that this solution will serve the Office of the Polish Financial Supervision Authority and also the regulator of the market of the financial and capital markets in the European Union.
Będzie to uprawnienie
And this will
dające
be
podstawę do żądania,
power
do wydawania zakazu lub ograniczenia w zakresie obrotu, dystrybucji lub sprzedaży instrumentów finansowych, ale to uprawnienie idzie nawet dalej, nie dotyczy wyłącznie stricte
financial instruments
instrumentów
turnover.
finansowych, ale te ograniczenia mogą być nakładane w zakresie również określonych rodzajów działalności,
be imposed on
instytucji finansowych,
different
czy
activities of
także
financial
samej
institutions
praktyki
and regarding the financial practice as well.
Szanowni Państwo, mając na uwadze
Ladies and gentlemen,
te
now
podstawy,
having in
które
mind the basis,
u zarania zrewidowania
the basis of
reżimu MiFID,
reviewing the MiFID system
także
and the MiFID regulation, also those
niekorzystne
negative
zdarzenia, które miały miejsce
events
na
that
rynku finansowym w ramach całej Unii Europejskiej,
took place in the whole
chociażby
European Union.
związane z mis-sellingiem.
For example, events
Mając na
considering
uwadze te okoliczności,
mis-selling. So
trudno
taking that into
trudno
account,
być zdziwionym
it is hard to be
tym, że
surprised
MiFID
by the
dotyczy
fact that
także, odnosi się
MiFID
także
also
do wynagrodzeń
concerns
pracowników.
the
Tych
salaries
pracowników,
for
którzy
employees,
rekomendują,
those employees
którzy
who are
oferują,
recommending,
informują,
who are
potencjalnych
informing
klientów,
potential
klientów,
customers
inwestorów
and potential
o danych
investors
instrumentach
about
finansowych.
a particular
W tym zakresie
financial
MiFID mówi, że
instruments.
system
So here
wynagrodzenia powinien
MiFID
zostać
says
w taki
that the
sposób
salary should
opracowany,
be
aby
prepared
wspierał
so
wykonywanie
that it
obowiązku działania w
supports
najlepszym
the
interesie klienta, a zarazem stanowił środek
fulfilling the
ograniczający
duties in the
ryzyko
best
wystąpienia
interest of the
konfliktów
customer
interesów.
and to
Z drugiej strony
avoid conflict of
musi
interest.
być on opracowany w taki
On
sposób,
the other
aby nie
hand,
skutkował podejmowaniem
it
działań w sposób nierzetelny,
cannot
nieprofesjonalny i
result
niezgodny z
in
zasadami
unprofessional
uczciwego obrotu
and
oraz właśnie
unfair
najlepiej pojętym interesem
and activities that
klienta.
are contradictory to the best interest of the customer.
Mamy z jednej strony właśnie odniesienia się do pracowników
So on the one hand, we've got here employees of financial instruments, of financial institutions who have to implement MiFID, but the second form of regulation of the functioning of such employees is their know-how and qualifications. So those employees will have to have knowledge and qualifications that qualify them for this job. And as the result of the situation is MiFID, which indicates in its preamble that the market of financial instruments is getting more and more complex on the one hand, but on the other hand, even more and more unprofessional investors decide to invest in financial instruments basing on the recommendations received from the representatives of the financial institutions. So the level of knowledge and qualification appropriate for the products that are offered is really, really important from this perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, MiFID II is a challenge which is a regulatory challenge because it touches upon a lot of areas of activity. So besides the regulatory issues, it also is connected with changes, for example, in IT systems, and you know it the best. Also, the fulfillment of MiFID also requires a certain level of workload, and you know that. But finally, MiFID will increase the transparency before transactions and after transactions, increasing the protection of the investor, especially the individual investor. Also, it will increase trust in financial institutions, which I said also at the beginning of my speech, which is crucial to healthy financial system and for the free market economies. I'd also like to tell you something about the present legal situation. We know that MiFID will be in place as of January, and we know that the government is still working on it. This week, legal conferences taking place, and the whole week is devoted to this conference. And it is not surprising because 200 pages is the volume of legal documents regarding MiFID. It also shows how huge legislative challenge it is for us. But in the near future, the final project of the amendment to the Act implementing MiFID and amending a lot of acts regarding financial markets will be ready. Ladies and gentlemen, as I already said, another huge challenge in this package of regulations, and the 2.0 regulations, is the PSD2 directive. This directive also comes into force as of January, that is 13th of January, to be precise. And as you perfectly know, this will change the previous activity in the banking sector in the direction of open banking. It will also stimulate the financial sector and the payment sector in the field of payment services. This directive is a response to the events which took place in the market of financial instruments and payment services. Payment transactions, the number of payment transactions increased. Also, some new payment services appeared, and this increased certain risks and threats regarding electronic payments, and these are risks for you as banks and for the customers of your institutions. Previously, only customers of banks had access to their accounts, but in line with this directive, this philosophy will be changed, because licensed entities, third entities on behalf of the client will have access to the accounts of the customers if they are empowered and authorized to do it. Also, there are three new payment services in the directive. The first one, the suppliers will be able to initiate a payment. Secondly, the access to the account will be broader, and thirdly, they will also be able to check the balance of the account. When it comes to the first issue, it will require the consent of the Polish Financial Supervision Authority, as it also concerns the financial institutions. We also need to indicate the risks that are connected with this service. This is risk of the customer, because their data can be captured, and so they can lose their assets that they maintain on the account. So this is a huge risk which will accompany the new service. When it comes to services concerning access to the data regarding the account, it will not require any consent of the PFSA. It will also only require an entry in the record. When it comes to risk, then we can lose the personal data of our clients, and we can lose the control of how they are used. And thirdly, the service of confirming the availability of the funds on the account, it will regard the payment instrument, and the customer will be able to use a payment instrument based on the card, which is issued by another payment service provider than the one which maintains the current account of the client. What are the risks regarding in this respect? Well, the responsibility will be divided between the bank and the payment service provider if a transaction fails. So there will be difference between, if there is any difference between the payment and the final balance on the account of the customer, we will not know who is responsible for that. And ladies and gentlemen, what will help implement the PSD2 is the technical standard, regulatory standard. It regards safe communication, and the European Commission is working on this document. The Office of the PFSA is also worried that the standard has not been published yet, and you probably also await its publication. It is important for the standard to be published, because we will have 18 months to implement the requirements of this document.
Chciałbym wspomnieć, odnosząc się do tego projektu regulacyjnych standardów technicznych,
regarding the technical standard, I would also like to say that each bank which maintains accounts of its customer should
umożliwiający bezpieczną wymianę informacji,
provide a channel of communication which is safe. That is, it regards the communication between the bank and the institution providing payment services. And we should prepare a special communication interface which will ensure safe communication with third-party entities. So, setting this these shared standards should aim at ensuring and maintaining full control on the development of the bank.
In the context of entry into force of PSD2, what's very important is collaboration between you and fintech institutions. One of the motifs behind issuing PSD2, or the consequence of it, is the appearance of many financial innovations. And here we can imagine two forms of collaboration. Number one, is collaboration without any agreements, and the second based on agreements determining the principles of future collaboration. Of course, some banks will be willing to provide access to those accounts. I'm sure we will see that as well. Ladies and gentlemen, in the context of strong authentication, I'd like to mention this topic which is raised in PSD2. This directive regulates online access, initiates digital transaction, or uses a remote channel that is related with risk of fraud. And this strong authentication rule, there are exceptions to this rule, and in this context, we may mention the access to payment accounts, payments for parking, and proximity payments. So there's a group of exceptions from this rule. Coming back to EBA guidance in the second quarter. Well, since we are talking about the future, we must mention that in the second quarter of 2018, the guidelines for operational risk and safety on payment services will enter into force, also on the PSD2. And the main subject matter of those guidance is framework for managing operational risk, outsourcing, and the risk assessment. And another set of guidelines, those guidelines will enter into force on the 13th of January 2018, like PSD2, concern classification of notifications to supervisory authorities, important operational events, significant operational events. So you must remember about those guidelines as well. And together with PSD2, we should apply them. PSD2 directive will also create important, significant challenges for financial supervision. The growing number of attacks on users of digital banking, internet and mobile banking causes the supervisory authority to have a close look at those new solutions. New technologies are becoming one of the most important areas of banking activity. So, implementing new solutions, banks should effectively manage risks on the bank side and on the client side, especially in terms of technical infrastructure. Supervisory authority has been drawing banks' attention to ensuring safety in digital banking, especially mobile banking. Mobile banking has been developing very dynamically recently, and this is linked with new challenges. KNF is monitoring those challenges. All problematic issues will be met with a reaction from KNF. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Marcin Pachucki, Deputy Chair of KNF, Financial Supervisory Authority. You need courage to put the words "on the edge" in the title of the conference. Right, so an edge, an abyss. Right, so Krzysztof Pietraszkiewicz, the president of the Polish Banking Association, who will talk about the edges as well. Good morning. I wanted to start my speech by quoting a song by Maryla Rodowicz, "I'm So Happy." We actually, according to the schedule, started the coffee, but let me just give you a few thoughts on the subject of banking. I wouldn't like to make it too long. Maybe I would be able to save some time. Right, so I was able to do it, right? I've made it. Right, so first thing I wanted to draw your attention to, without going into detail, I think that in Poland and in many other countries of the region, we are in a situation that we need to discuss to which extent in our life there is space for taking obligations by states, and what we as citizens and businesses should do. We need this reflection in spite of a lot of awareness raising. A second point I wanted to draw attention to are the burdens and limitations placed on the banking sector. Indeed, in some areas they are huge and they grow at a very quick pace. But sometimes we have programmed attacks on the banking sector. All the limitations, all the burdens on the banking sector. Andrzej Pongowski, I'm sure, wouldn't be mad by using this poster, but all those burdens, all those limitations, all the requirements are sometimes not justified. Poland is still a country with low banking coverage. Banking sector development should contribute to the growth of Polish economy. Polish banking sector provides good quality service at reasonable prices. And undoubtedly in the coming years we must spend a lot of money on the development of the Polish banking sector. What I find problematic is that, of course, you should criticize the banking sector for justified reasons. But what I find problematic, what I find disappointing, is attacks on the banking sectors and the destruction of trust in the banking sector. The way we should discuss is that banking, as a very important sector, is our shared good, that we should make sure that it functions as well as possible, and we shouldn't allow the trust in the banking sector to be destroyed. It's all about education. Sometimes when I'm looking at the debates, people are not negotiating. People do not trust each other, but groups of customers do not want to talk to banks. Sometimes this is counterproductive. Another point, over-regulation. This is really serious. It's not normal when in a country we will have up to 45,000 pages of regulations. The banking sector is involved in all sectors of the economy. So if you were to read only some of those pages, it's not feasible. In a smaller bank, for a smaller bank, it's not possible to even read so many pages of regulations. In some cases, we have delays in regulation. We've been talking for over 10 years on promissory notes. It's a problem of systemic solution for long-term, regarding long-term savings. We should discuss to which extent and how we should launch changing percentage instruments. And if there is a need, if there is a group of customers, clients interested, I think it's simply justified. For 10 years, we weren't able to solve the problem of abusive clauses. It's impossible to implement, say, modifying clauses in Poland, so it can't be this way. Banks were being forced to change their agreements for over 10 years, and 97% say we don't need that. I'm not going to come to a bank and change an agreement that I've signed with the bank 8 to 10 years ago. What I find problematic is that very often politicians are judges in their own case. For over 10 years, 11, 12 years, we've seen the undermining of the collaboration between supervising authorities and the banking sector. It started on a very modest note. First, we were prohibited from speaking at the meetings of the financial supervisory authority. Recently, there are no representatives in the BGK, one of the BGK bodies. We must find a forum to exchange views on what's important for the sector. It's also, my predecessor spoke about PSD. I would like to underline the position of the UKNF. If you want us to tell us, our clients, please provide your logins to other third parties, well, it's crazy. On the one hand, we have huge cyber attacks on the banking sectors. On the other hand, we have solutions which weren't really well prepared. I think we should be responsible here. I'm also concerned about the offers to provide loans without checking customers in BIK, without providing any safeguards. Another point, maybe not for today's conference, but in the banking sector, we should answer questions like, for example, why, in spite of a good economic position, we have a huge emigration of young people. It's not a problem only for the banking sector, it's a problem for us as a society. Why, in a crisis sector, we have people taking excessive risk in our market? And why is it so difficult to reach an agreement on strategic issues? Look at what's happened in Europe since 1900. We may discuss whether the methodology makes sense, but it proves our intuition. There's a lot of populist ideas around, and we must face it together. What we need to reflect on is the number of persons capable of employment, not only in Poland but in many regions of the world. What's interesting for us as bankers is the size of the amount of assets in central banks and linked activities. Finally, the speculation banks. Just look at how they grew in technology, in biotechnology, in mortgage, and how quickly we see the problem of cryptocurrencies growing. I'm grateful KNF for making people aware that they shouldn't go crazy about it. Just a few hundred meters away from here, there was a conference organized saying that it's all okay, you should go into it. I want the banking sector to stay away from this. I would like to show you what correction means for the real estate market and other markets, financial markets. Some of you, or maybe all of you, know this picture, the probability of increase of interest rates measured by the tallness, by the height of the heads of Federal Reserve. So we should expect the increase of interest rates, maybe. I'm so sorry for this digression, but we deserve it, actually. So, if it's partly true that, as forecasted by experts, we are ahead of a bubble in many markets: cryptocurrencies, motoring, automotive markets, a bond market, the bubble in the index, the real estate bubble. Even if it's only partly true, this means that on a national scale, regional scale, and in banks, we must take reasonable decisions and actions. So it seems that we must increase our cooperation. What makes me happy? Let me just mention those things. There are works on making the fiscal system more tight, prevention of fraud, the collaboration between banks and with the Ministry of Digitization, Ministry of Finance, and other authorities. The cooperation there is really good. In the face of many different threats, I would like to have as good cooperation as possible with those authorities. We are working on sectoral qualification framework. We are working on changing the reporting system. The same banks cannot report to different authorities, because they need to employ a lot of people to do that. An opportunity, but also a risk, is the Internet of Things. What I would like to focus on is certain thoughts for the future. What's important for us and our customers is that money entrusted to us by the customers are safe, to make sure that the payments are on time, that loans are provided to our customers, and we must make sure that it's all in line with the law. And of course, we must keep educating the customers and our employees. But we must remember that implementing new products, we must be very careful and make sure that the customer, the agent, and the regulator must know the risk of the product and technology. We must always follow this rule. A customer has to be educated, especially to use new technologies, to use those new devices. It would be very unfortunate if we, being a leader in digital economy in Poland, allow this to cause any problems for companies, businesses, and people, private people. So thank you for collaboration to the Financial Supervision Commission in this area. Also, we must not close our eyes to a reduction of the quality of some products and the qualities. I'm happy that the ethics committee is keeping an eye on it. So treat it as a sort of reflection. In the recent period, we've been closer to philosophical concepts of Newton, but some people were closer to Einstein, to quantum physics. I think that we are at least at the age where both those philosophical ideas should well, we should actually follow both philosophies, both concepts. Poles not always, well, more and more frequently compare themselves to Germans, to people in France. So it seems to me that we should continue to work on strengthening the Polish businesses. We should increase the professional activity of our citizens. We should improve the competitiveness, and we should stabilize collaboration between businesses and R&D units.
We should also come back to the discussion about our presence in the Eurozone. This is truly a case for the banking sector. I would like to remind you that the banking sector, in 90%, that is employees of banks, supported our accession to the Eurozone. We should build, consequently, the power of the Polish financial institutions, but also to build long-term programs of saving and investments. I know that we talk about it rarely, and it worries me because we do it too rarely, that we should remember about being solidar. It is very important for each community and each region. I know that some of you will say that it is not a place to talk about such issues. I would like to say that, to my mind, we have to, from time to time, also in the banking milieu, talk about those cases, because if we won't support each other, if we won't solve our problems together, then we definitely will not be able to solve a lot of other problems in our lives and in our country. I wish you all the best, and I wish you to be successful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was Krzysztof Pietraszkiewicz, President of the Polish Bank Association. Now we are more nervous, I guess, but I wouldn't like to dwell on it. I'm sure we will debate with Mr. President in other fora. So now a 30 minutes break, and later